So recently, in the diocesan email list, our bishops and other lay leaders have been urgently emailing the clergy and the lay leaders of the diocese saying, we don't have enough people to fill the many slots in elected leadership in our diocese. Would you please send your names of people that we can fill? And as I thought about this, I wondered, why is that the question? Why is that the question? We have, let's say, 100 spots to fill on 15 different commissions and committees of our diocese, and we need to find 100 people, and maybe we don't need 100, slots. Maybe we don't need all these committees. And a couple weeks ago at General Convention, our church elected a new presiding bishop to replace Michael Curry, the famous royal wedding preacher among many things. And our new presiding bishop, Sean Rowe, has a doctorate in organizational development, and he has been a part of several different dioceses. He's now the bishop actually of 2 dioceses that are working together. And in his first sermon and his first speech, he basically hit on the same point, which was we need to restructure and rethink our church today. Otherwise, we will collapse under the weight of all this structure. We are in an existential crisis. Now is not the time to be trying to fill 100 spots. Maybe it's the time to ask, do we need all these different commissions and committees? To give you an example, our national church, which is funded by all the local parishes like ours, has almost a $50 million a year budget. So over a triennium, 3 years, it's $150 million. And at General Convention, over 6 days, we passed almost 400 resolutions. So all of these different committees are working to draft language for the national church to take a stand on certain issues, almost 400 resolutions. And this is for a church that since 2012, not in the 50s, not in the 60s, not in the 70s, not in the 90s, since 2012 to today, has decreased by 20%. By 20%. So indeed, we are in an existential crisis, and maybe now is the time to think about shrinking all this sort of bloated bureaucracy. And when I talk like this, I think for some of us, this might resonate in some way, because this kind of language and this kind of thinking fits the wisdom of the age. And really, when we think about the wisdom of the age, we think about who is sort of the Athens, the really creative people in our culture. We think about Silicon Valley. And that is a place where they are all about doing the most you can with the fewest resources necessary. I just recently read about a company that said, any software product you have, we will give you 80% of that product at 10% of the cost. And the way this company will do this, the founder said, is we're going to use AI, and we're going to outsource and find some very, very cheap programmers from a different place, not the United States. And by doing this, we can replace almost all the software you use right now, 80% of the functionality at only 10% of the cost. And we think to ourselves, yes, maybe this is sort of the way our church should go, right? We have all this bureaucracy. We're shrinking. Do we really need to try to fill 100 committee positions? Maybe only we need 20 or 10. Right. Now, when we look at the gospel passage today, and often church innovators and leaders will use this passage to say, see, Jesus sends out his disciples and is saying the same thing. He's saying, go out there, take nothing but a staff, no bag, no bread, no money, right? And so often I've heard this passage used precisely in this way, that we too now need to let go of all the things that are weighing us down, all these old buildings that we can't afford anymore, all these clergy even with their pensions and things we can't afford, right? All of this stuff we need to let go to just do the ministry of God. And in some ways, it's a very powerful, resonant message, because once again, it fits the wisdom of the age that is coming out from our philosopher kings out in Silicon Valley, who are teaching us the same thing and on our models. But if we read a little more closely into this passage, we see something a little strange. So Jesus tells them, you can take a staff, but no bag. And, why not no staff and no bag? Or why not a staff and a bag? Why this very specific instruction? And partly, it's because there was a group of people at that time in the early Roman Empire who were also philosophers. They were sort of the wisdom of the age, and they were the cynics. They were called the cynics, and they've traced their line back to Diogenes back in the 4th and 5th century Greece several hundred years ago. But somehow in the Roman Empire, when Jesus was working and the Gospel of Mark was being written, they made a comeback. They had sort of been around for a couple hundred years, and they went into abeyance, but they now were back, these cynic philosophers. And one thing about the cynic philosophers is they would go around and they would have a staff, but they would have a bag and then a smaller bag, and they would do this because they would beg for money. This is how they survived. And the cynic philosophers had all sorts of ideas. One was what they called parousia, bold speech. So they said, social convention, this courtesy, this is nonsense. Truth is that this is all just human-made, so we're just going to be people who are going to be boldly speaking to you the truth without any consideration of your feelings or social propriety. They also had no shame, and that was specifically part of their teaching. Again, shame is a sort of a social construction, so they would eat in the marketplace, even though that was considered gauche and déclassé. They would defecate anywhere. They would make love anywhere. The word cynic actually is a direct transliteration of the word dog-like. And they claim that, when that was a criticism used against them, they claim that as their identity. Yes, we're like dogs. We have that same freedom that dogs do. We will go wherever we want. We are free. We will not pay attention to social propriety because we are truth tellers, and we're not going to carry any heavy stuff, have any bureaucratic stuff around us. We're just going to have a bag and a staff. But Jesus tells his followers, do not carry a bag. And what scholars think he's saying here is, I don't want you to be mistaken for cynics, these wandering itinerant philosophers. That is not what I'm about, and that is not what your mission is going to be about. He also says, I want you to go out 2 by 2. So already, it is very different than a cynic model. Now you have a partner, and so you can't just go like a dog wherever you want. You have to go with someone else. You have to be dependent, interdependent on someone. You're not totally free. And now if you don't have a bag, you can't beg. Right? You're not going to survive by begging people for money or food and just using that to survive. No, you don't have a bag. You're not a cynic philosopher. You have to rely on the hospitality of other early Jesus followers in these cities, often very wealthy women. So women were an essential part of the early church, or just people who hear your message and say, wow, do you have a place to sleep tonight? Why don't you come and have dinner with me? So you have to be reliant on other people. You can't just go and just say your crazy stuff and then get some money from people and just live your independent, dog-like life. And in thinking about this difference between Jesus and the wisdom of his age and the cynics, I think it behooves us to be a little bit more cautious when we think about how we might restructure our church in light of the challenges we are facing now, that maybe following the wisdom of our new philosopher kings from Silicon Valley is not exactly what Jesus wants. And so I'm going to end with a story about maybe how Jesus does want us to be in the world. So in the Times this past week, there was a really incredible op-ed by a person. The title was something like, notes from a formerly unpromising person. You may have read this. And this person describes how she was really quite a messed up young person. Her mother had died, her father had remarried, moved the family across the country. She had been part of what sounded like a kind of an abusive evangelical sect. And so in high school, she said her GPA was 0.47 or 4.6, you know. She said she was kind of proud perversely because it's actually very hard to do that badly in school to have such a low GPA. And so she describes how the dean of her high school then said, we have to expel you because you're not passing anything. And then a few months later, her parents, her stepmother and father, kick her out of the house. So now she's like 16. For the next 3 years, she spends in just really hard, random jobs, waitressing, working at a gas station, doing all just kinds of stuff just to keep her life together until someone finally tells her, and she says they told her in a really kind way, although it doesn't read that way, hey, do you want to be a loser your whole life? You have to go to college. You have to get it together. And so she applied to college, this community college, and you can imagine, from a Silicon Valley kind of efficiency, we're only taking the best people, or the cheapest and the best people. This person had a terrible transcript, basically all Fs, no letters of recommendation, no extracurricular activities, was clearly very problematic, had some real personal issues. And so I think in a certain way, this would not be the person that we would put on a church committee. This would not be a person that you would hire in your company. This would certainly not be a person you would allow into your college, even a community college. And then she meets the admissions officer, who hears her story. He says, what's going on? And after he listens, he senses that she has something, a kind of grit, that maybe will give her a chance at the school. And so she says, you know what? He says to her, I'm going to take a chance on you. Okay, we're going to let you in. I'm going to take a chance on you. And then so she gets into college and then grad school and then eventually becomes a journalist and a writer. And so I think the point is this. When Jesus sends out his disciples and tells them not to be like the cynic philosophers, not to try to adapt to the wisdom of the age, I think he's saying something to the church as well. Let us not just parrot a bunch of organizational techniques from Silicon Valley and try to make ourselves really efficient. Let us think about, as the disciples do, how we actually can heal people. And here is a powerful example, a real-world example, not a non-miraculous, in terms of supernatural, I've healed you of cancer right now, way of actually healing people. This admissions officer talked to this woman, said, what is your story? Heard her story, and then did not judge her, did not say, well, obviously, you should try, being a gas station attendant. You can't know. He said, okay, I'm going to take a chance on you. And so what would it be like for us as disciples of Jesus Christ today, who have also been sent out into our world, where all these, modern-day cynic philosophers are running around, and make that our ministry? To say, tell me your story, and then when we hear the story, we say, okay, that's fine. Let's take this journey together. I'll take a chance on you.